It's only been 4 years, but Lyft and others have really, really revolutionized the way we get around, and it's just the start. Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the impacts you're seeing on the built environment in terms of, dropping people off and picking them up and that sort of thing?
Now that people are using mobility as a service instead of owning their own cars as often as they used to, it really changes the way that people need to use physical space in cities. And so it requires city planners to kind of reimagine the way that they use infrastructure like curb space. So in the past, in a dense urban core, you might still see street parking along all of those streets. But let's say, a larger and larger percentage of those people who are coming into the city are now coming through using a Lyft ride instead of driving their own car. The city can gradually think about repurposing that space and actually using it to allow for safe pickup and drop-off zones for Lyft drivers and riders, to allow that activity to happen in a seamless way that doesn't have cars double parked in street lanes. But that kind of transition in the use of public space does require a little bit of time, and it requires support from policymakers.
And from policymakers, are you seeing any changes to planning in terms of when you have a new development going in, thinking about what the future is in 5, 10, 15 years?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Long-range planners, whether they be in the private sector working with developers or whether they're working for transportation agencies and planning agencies, they're really looking at that big picture, and they're trying to forecast trends in changes in demographics and transportation behavior. So we've had a lot of conversations with them about what is Lyft going to mean for transportation 30 years from now, 20 years from now. So we're starting to share with them some information about how people use Lyft today, helping to try to get them an opportunity to adjust their models to account for this kinds of behavior. Because really, if you look at the existing travel demand models, as they call them, they don't even have a category for what Lyft is. They haven't really had enough information, enough data to allow them to model that successfully. So we want to equip them with the information to allow them to do that, and also to have kind of exposure to our big picture thinking about what new services and products we expect to come on the market.
Well, and one of the things you talked about was accessibility of it, and you have some ideas there that really could shake up the transit world, I suppose.
Absolutely. So, if you think about the way that public transit has traditionally been defined, I call it macro transit as opposed to micro transit, because it's kind of been a high capacity fixed route kind of a phenomenon. It works really great if you happen to live near a train station or if you happen to be in a big city where there's really frequent service. But the vast majority of Americans don't live in places like that, and they don't live really close enough to the train station to be able to just walk or bike there. That's why the vast majority of Americans, over 76%, actually drive to work alone. And that's what causes congestion. It causes greenhouse gas emissions. And so if we want to change that behavior, we actually need to think about reimagining what public transit is and how to deliver that in communities in a way that's more tailored to the different circumstances in American, environments. So, for example, when you think about a suburban community, the way that is laid out is really different than an urban core. It doesn't have the density that can actually allow enough people to fill up a 40-foot bus or to fill up a train. So in those kinds of places, transit agencies have still been trying to run on a fixed route basis with a 40-foot bus, and it's just sitting empty. It only has a few people on it, and it's only coming once an hour. And that's not a service that can attract enough riders to really build up viability of the system, or even really provide a convenient service for folks that can attract people away from car ownership. So by working with Lyft, there's an opportunity for us to develop partnerships with public transit agencies, actually saving them money in providing that service, because instead of having 4 people on a 40-foot bus where there's a really high cost per passenger, maybe it's just giving them a virtual voucher, gives them a few dollars off of a Lyft ride, costs less than the subsidy that the agency would provide for a transit vehicle, and yet gives that person a much higher quality service, getting them picked up in just a few minutes.
Great. Well, and I guess as you mix autonomy in there, that'll be the future, huh?
Absolutely. If you think about radically democratizing access to transportation, there's no technology that'll have a greater impact than autonomous vehicles, because it's going to bring down the cost so substantially. It'll be pennies on the dollar compared to what it is to get a Lyft ride today, and that's going to really shift the equation in terms of whether people choose to own a car or choose to have mobility as a service.
Excellent. Emily, thanks for your forward-looking future here. Thanks.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks.